Oh, G Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Gurdjieff, or A Time Between Worlds by Layman Pascal. This was a wonderful book released by Sky Meadow Press, and I was really glad to see Brendan starting this press. I think that's really, really cool, out of Vermont, and I really like the introduction as well, the foreword, where they were talking about what the Sky Meadow Institute was going to be interested in, focused on advancing system-based thinking about the things that matter most. And I really think it's wonderful that they're starting with this book by the great Layman Pascal, who I love and I love speaking with, and I enjoy his work and his thinking. And I think this is just a masterful introduction to Gurdjieff. I am a novice on Gurdjieff. I don't know much about him. I have not read any of his books, but now I want to. And I think that's a testament to the success of the text. I love how Layman incorporates his own thinking about Gurdjieff with a description of Gurdjieff's ideas. He brings in some of the thinkers on the liminal web in the metamodern community. And I really appreciate how he starts his text with kind of an introduction to Gurdjieff's life, a little biography, talking about kind of where he was situated in the historic moment regarding, say, World War I, then the occupation of France by the Nazis, how his thinking developed, how to approach Gurdjieff. And again, like I said, after reading this book, I'm extremely interested in Gurdjieff, and I think that just is a testament to the accomplishment of Layman Pascal in this work. And I think also that it's true on page 9, he says, Layman writes, that it may turn out that this is not a short, strange interval between two worlds, but rather the beginning of a world characterized implicitly by strangeness and betweenness, and that's in regard to our life now, our world now, this moment where strangeness and betweenness might be a quality and characteristic we need to get used to. And it makes me think of Cadell's encouragement for us to become alien and to be alien. And I think Layman makes a strong case that Gurdjieff could be useful to think for this interval of strangeness and betweenness that we need to get used to and learn to actually enjoy, which makes me think about the incompleteness of the subject we need to enjoy so that we can belong again, the childhood of a Nietzsche. I really enjoyed the plan, going over the plan that Gurdjieff had for his work and spreading it, and that Layman talks about on page 16 and 17, then, the audaciously practical plan. And I think, hey, there's something there that maybe people on the liminal web need to look through. I really enjoyed that. I like some of the lines he has, like on page 24, it may be sophistic to think that the universe was organized to give us a meaning, but it could be equally narcissistic to assume that all meaning is derived only from creatures like ourselves. That's a lovely turn of phrase. And I think this notion that he has on page 26, talking about kind of Gurdjieff's vision, he says, the vision asserts that the purpose of individual existential development and collective human wisdom cultivation is to serve a particular set of functions within our multidimensional ecology and to help the ecology fulfill its natural role within the complex living cosmos. So this kind of integration with the environment, with the world, that we have to think about how to use our subjective wisdom, our subjective experience and our wisdom cultivation to kind of think in terms of integration. And there was a part in the book where he said something about how integration is more important for Gurdjieff than higher consciousness. Often you'll have this emphasis on higher consciousness, but Layman Pascal makes the point that Gurdjieff is more interested in integration, but some of the ways that Gurdjieff goes about suggesting we might obtain integration is quite fascinating. The particular practices. And like there was this one part where he talks, where it's kind of like, we don't even think about how our body shows sadness, for example. How does the body show sadness? We would say tears or something, but have we ever consciously thought about that? How do we show emotion? What about emotions like anxiety? How do we show that in a manner that makes it distinct from fear? What about really nuanced emotions like the feeling of the vastness of the cosmos, or the kind of that sublime, maybe Burke's sublimity, where we feel small but we're glad to feel small? How do we show that? there's really a sense that for Gurdjieff, we never think about how our body shows emotions. We never practice showing emotions. Like, in writing, creative writing, they talk all the time about showing, not telling. But how many of us have learned how to show with our body, our internal processes? I thought that was quite a compelling notion. Like the page, a way to look on page 29. Have you considered what inner sensation you ought to feel when you say the word I to yourself? Has the question even come up? So that's kind of another example of like, do we even think about what we should feel or how we feel when we say something like I, or think ego, or think other? I think often we don't even, the feelings we have when we say something are just the feelings we have when we say something. We don't think about training it, or we don't really think about what kind of intelligence that might unveil. It's quite compelling to consider, it's compelling to think that there is an intelligence of the awareness of the emotion we feel in the uttering of a term, of a word, of a signifier. That's fascinating. Yeah, and there was this also part where he was kind of talking about like these kind of practices that Gurdjieff is getting at, integration. Which I'm much more of a fan of that than an emphasis on higher consciousness. So like he has this part on page 75 where he says, suppose you are doing push-ups. That takes some physical effort. What if you also make the unusual mental effort to count your repetitions by threes, 1, 4, 7, 10, 13? And what if all the while you also make an effort in your heart to feel only gratitude? That sounds really difficult, doesn't it? But that kind of practice is what we're getting at with integration. Listening to a very intellectual podcast while mowing the lawn. That's a good start. Now, at the same time, feel how beautiful of a day it is. There's somewhere else in the book where he talks about 3 different practices with your fingers. And I think that's very interesting. Like, can you have different kinds of intelligences in operation at the same time? What would those practices look like? What kind of subjectivity could you obtain if you learned how to integrate those intelligences and to work them together? That's very interesting. I like also what he says from Gurdjieff. We could also draw upon his situating of psychotechnologies within ecological narratives of imperfect multidimensional beings who are evolving and evolving and involving simultaneously. I like that, evolving and involving. And yeah, there's something also to be said about that multifaceted intelligence for really coming to terms with the ecological situation, or seeing ourselves part of the ecological situation. Because if we can't integrate intelligences, how can we integrate ourselves with the world? So there's something very interesting about that. I really also like this point on 87 where he says, that we have internal operating... So, there are internal operating systems that may not automatically be activated by the perception. So there's this notion, I think, very often where we assume that all we have to do is perceive and then the internal operations will follow. We see food, we feel hunger. We see, a tree, then, memory is activated. So there's this sense in which all we have to do is perceive and our internal state will, just kind of start to activate accordingly. But Gurdjieff and Pascal are suggesting that that's not the case, that there actually might be internal processes that are not automatically activated simply because we engage in perception, which then, I really, really like. Really like that idea where he talks about we need nutritious experiences that came up in our talk when we had a talk. I really on meta-shamanism, I believe. I really enjoyed that. And again, he talks about what bodily gestures appropriately express that particular feeling. A particular kind of metacognitive effort would most likely be required to discover this data about yourself. So this idea, like, we don't think about our bodily gestures for particular feelings. He talks about that on 87, and that's really just a compelling notion. I really like the idea of perception food as well, like what kind of food we take in to perceive the world in a more nutritious way. We know there's more nutritious food, but what about more nutritious perceptions? I think that's compelling. And also that might open up different vibes. He had that part where he talks about, if you saw an automobile but it was suddenly floating upside down, it'd be the same structure, but it'd have a different vibe. And he talks about David, Lynch, some he'll reference Lynch. And it makes me think that if we learned how to really get good at perception, there might be vibes we'd unlock that we, otherwise would never unlock. He has this line too on page 114 where he says the experiential possibility of working with contradictory inner pluralities becomes the key insight that Gurdjieff uses in the rest of his adventures to probe and tweak all our inherited human psychotechnologies. And that makes me think of Hegel. Now, I'm biased, but I think that notion of contradictory inner pluralities is extremely important for unlocking human psychotechnologies, and also not to be captured by various Nash equilibria. It's also this wonderful idea from Ouspensky, who was a follower of Gurdjieff, page 115 at the top, where he says, consciousness is when you think all your thoughts at once. Conscious is when you feel all your feelings at once. That's stunning. Could we prove capable of that? To think all our thoughts at once, to feel all our feelings at once? Until we do so, we're not conscious. We might be more like robots. And I appreciate some of the chapters where Layman goes through some of the more popular notions associated with Gurdjieff, like the idea that people are robots, and to complexify that a little bit. And hey, maybe manure is a good thing. So I really like that. And I like how he describes the Gurdjieffian approach as focused on renormalizing ordinary human beings of contemporary civilization so that a resuscitated wisdom culture could become capable of participating in the cosmically significant regeneration of the terrestrial biosphere and the associated emergence of authentic new shamans from among the dominant sapient species. That's a very interesting framing of Gurdjieff's work. And again, like I say, after reading Layman Pascal's book, I would like to read Gurdjieff. So I think that just kind of speaks to the success of the text. And then it is on page here, that line that from 164. Our goal is not simply to activate higher forms of consciousness, but to integrate and assimilate them harmoniously. That's beautiful. I like these reflections on 165 on this weird question of why we keep attacking the leading edge. There seems to be a perpetual war on wisdom. Is concerned, Gurdjieff, that we need to learn how to metabolize strangeness, page 173, that's outstanding. And then this wonderful notion on 208 on a way to advance, a key way to advance is by discovering a logic that you can use to upset yourself at every step. That's magnificent. And again, makes me think, Hegel, we need to upset ourselves, or else we're going to fall into a Nash equilibria. I think that's true. And again, this just all shows how compelling Gurdjieff is, and maybe we can associate Gurdjieff with learning practices to make us more menti-divergent, like Simone Weil, which, belonging again to one is going to emphasize is necessary for us to avoid the Nash equilibria that lead to the suboptimal results that define our global situation. And so Gurdjieff seems to be someone who could be part of the conversation of how to avoid those suboptimal results. And I really like this line on 245, which I'll close with, of, I only am when I wish to be more and to still be. The willingness to go beyond myself is what it takes to be myself. I think that's absolutely true. And I think Layman Pascal has given us a book that can inspire us to want to go beyond ourselves, precisely so we can be ourselves, because anything short will not suffice. For more by Layman Pascal, please visit The Integral Stage. You can find the book on Amazon. Gurdjieff for a Time Between Worlds, hyper-personal essays on the grandfather of metamodern spirituality by Layman Pascal. I highly suggest picking up a copy of the text today. And thank you so much for your time.